priceless gem vanished. No witnesses, no traces, just whispers. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallow. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. It means the world when you share. This journey is better because of you. Let's begin. It was the sort of evening that made England seem like a country that had forgotten how to smile. Grey mist pressed against the windows of the Marchmont estate, and the wind came in gusts that rattled the eaves, like the tapping of long, impatient fingers. Inside the drawing-room, the mood was no less brittle. Lady Eugenia Marchmont stood near the fireplace, stiff as one of the portraits above the mantel. Her silver hair was drawn back with military precision, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Across from her, lounging rather too easily on the velvet settee, was her nephew, Lawrence Marchmont, a young man with the careless confidence of someone who had inherited rather than earned. Between them hung the tension of an unresolved grievance. "I still don't believe you understand the gravity of what's happened," Lady Eugenia said sharply. Lawrence gave a shrug that barely acknowledged the air around him. "A trinket's gone missing, that's all. If we stop the world every time someone misplaced a jewel—" "It is not a trinket," she snapped. "It is the Marchmont sapphire. Do you even comprehend what that means? It has been in this family for nearly 2 centuries. Your great-grandfather had it mounted in that pendant for your great-grandmother's wedding day. It was our legacy." Lawrence looked down at the empty velvet box on the table, the shape of the pendant still impressed in its lining. Or perhaps just an old superstition wrapped in silver filigree. You know what they say, the Marchmont sapphire brings ruin to whoever wears it. Lady Eugenia paled. You forget yourself. Outside the room, the creak of a floorboard disturbed the quiet. For a moment, both turned toward the hallway, but no one appeared. "I've already sent for Inspector Grange," she said at last, "and he is sending someone else, someone special, apparently, a foreigner." Lawrence lifted an eyebrow. "Oh? What sort of foreigner?" "A detective. Belgian, I think. A Monsieur Hercule Poirot." Lawrence snorted. "Sounds theatrical." "He is said to be exceptionally thorough," she replied coldly, "which should not trouble anyone with a clear conscience." Lawrence smiled, and the silence settled again, heavy and unresolved. By the time Hercule Poirot arrived at Marchmont Hall the following afternoon, the weather had not improved, but the mood had deepened into something almost ceremonial. The house stood on a bluff above the sea, grand and weary. Fog curled around the black iron gates as the car rolled to a stop. Poirot stepped out, immaculately dressed in a grey suit with a boutonniere no larger than a coin. He surveyed the house with a faint tilt of the head, his moustache bristling against the cold. The door opened before he knocked. A butler, lean, unsmiling, nodded. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady Marchmont is expecting you." "I am charmed," Poirot said with a courteous bow. "And may I say, this house, formidable. One feels the weight of history pressing from every stone." "Quite," said the butler with no enthusiasm, and led him through a corridor of portraits with watchful eyes. The drawing-room was much as Poirot expected, symmetrical, refined, and heavy with silence. Lady Eugenia rose the moment he entered, her expression precise, as if she had been waiting for him to complete some pattern already half-formed in her mind. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "thank you for coming." Poirot bowed again. "Madame, it is my pleasure. You will forgive me if I say it. A theft of such a jewel is not just a matter of police. It is, how do you say, a matter of soul." Lady Eugenia blinked. "The Marchmont sapphire is gone. Removed from its case sometime between Thursday evening and Friday morning. Only 6 people were in the house. The staff had already retired. We discovered it missing just before tea on Friday." 6 people, Poirot murmured. "A small gathering. How intimate? You will tell me their names?" Lady Eugenia gestured toward the hearth where Lawrence was again seated, this time with a book open and unread on his lap. "My nephew, Mr. Lawrence Marchmont, my companion, Miss Chloe Faraday, a house guest, Colonel Delafield, Miss Penelope Grey, my late sister's daughter, and Reverend Alton, who was staying overnight after the charity auction." Poirot glanced toward the empty velvet case. And this auction? It was public. Yes, but the sapphire was not part of the display. It was here, locked in this room. Only I and Parsons, our butler, had the key. Parsons, who admitted me. "Yes." Poirot nodded slowly. "May I see the case?" Lady Eugenia passed him the box. Poirot examined the edges, the hinges, and even sniffed the inside before placing it delicately on the table. "And no one left the estate that night?" "No," she said. "The road was flooded. No one could have come or gone without being noticed. We were effectively trapped together." Poirot allowed the silence to linger a moment. "Ah, but that changes things, n'est-ce pas? A theft in an open world is one matter, but here, closed off, amongst so few, it is not theft, madame, it is betrayal." Lawrence spoke then lazily. "Or it could just be a misplaced ornament." Poirot turned, and his dark eyes settled on the young man. "Ah, monsieur, you remind me of a man who says a scream in the night is merely the wind. Often he is wrong." He moved closer to the fire, warming his hands. "Let us proceed with delicacy," he said. "No accusations, no dramatics, just facts, little facts like crumbs on a white tablecloth. And from them, the pattern, it reveals itself." Lady Eugenia's face softened just a fraction. "What will you do first?" Poirot smiled. "I will speak to each guest, but first I would like to see the rest of the room. Not the parts you have shown the police, but the ones you did not think important." "The rug?" she asked, confused. "Everything," he replied with a flourish of the hand. "The rug, the air, the chairs, the forgotten ash in the tray. You see, madame, in every affair, especially the affair of a missing sapphire, it is not the gem itself that speaks. It is the silence that surrounds it." And with that, he knelt beside the armchair nearest the window, running his gloved hand along the side of the cushion with the gentleness of a man searching not for jewels, but for truth itself. Poirot rose slowly from beside the armchair, brushing a speck of invisible dust from his lapel. He walked with precise steps to the window, gazing through the fogged glass. The grounds were muted beneath the haze, garden paths disappearing into white, trees reduced to silhouettes. It was a world designed for secrets. Behind him, Lawrence yawned and closed his book with a thud. "So, Monsieur Poirot, what do you think? That one of us tiptoed in here during the night and stole the family jewel while everyone else snored politely in their beds?" Poirot turned his head, eyes narrowed not in anger, but in calculation. "You make it sound quite civil, monsieur, but theft is rarely so courteous. It is clumsy, desperate, it leaves traces." Lady Eugenia crossed her arms. "And do you believe the thief is still in the house?" Poirot smiled faintly. "But of course. Where else would such a person be? This is not a crime of the streets. It is one of proximity, intimacy, trust, misused." He walked to the table and opened his notebook with theatrical care. "Before we proceed further, madame, I must insist. Might I meet the other guests?" Lady Eugenia nodded to the butler, who waited silently at the door like a shadow stitched into the wood. "Parsons, please ask Miss Faraday and Colonel Delafield to join us, and Miss Grey and Reverend Alton after that." Parsons bowed and departed, the door clicking shut behind him. Poirot settled into a high-backed chair and crossed his legs delicately. "Tell me, madame, when was the last time the sapphire was seen?" "Thursday evening. After dinner, I showed it briefly to Miss Grey and Reverend Alton in this very room. They had never seen it before. I returned it to its case and locked the drawer. Poirot steepled his fingers. And you are certain it was still there afterward? I did not look again until the following afternoon. I had meant to show it to Colonel Delafield. He is something of a collector. But when I opened the case, her voice trailed off, but her meaning was clear. There was a knock at the door. Parsons reappeared, ushering in two people who,
parents had cast aside. She realized the Christmas text that had broken her heart was in fact the greatest gift Melanie had ever given her. It had forced her to see the truth, to stop accepting less than she deserved, and to reclaim her own worth. She had lost a daughter, but she had found herself, and in the end, that trade was worth every penny of the inheritance that had made it possible.
something about inheritance, I imagine. Poirot made another note. Very interesting. And now, if you will allow me, I would like to speak with the remaining two guests. Parsons reappeared, as if conjured, and nodded. Miss Grey and Reverend Alton are waiting, sir. They entered together, Penelope Grey, a pale young woman with quiet eyes and a guarded stance, and Reverend Alton, a rotund man in his 60s with rosy cheeks and the faint smell of pipe smoke about him. Miss Grey, Poirot said warmly, please come closer. I hope you do not mind these questions. She shook her head. I understand. You were in the music room with Miss Faraday on Thursday night? She nodded. Yes, we played for a while. She's very kind. You saw the Sapphire? Yes. Aunt Eugenia showed it to us earlier in the drawing room. It was very beautiful. Poirot watched her closely. You leaned close, yes? She hesitated. Only to see the detail. I didn't touch it. Poirot turned to the Reverend. And you, sir? You played cards with Colonel Delafield? The vicar nodded cheerfully. Whist, yes. He beat me handily. I retired early, though, not long after the clock struck 10. Too much roast at dinner, I'm afraid. Poirot gave a courteous nod. Thank you. That is all for now. Lady Eugenia stood, clearly anxious. And now? What will you do next, Monsieur Poirot? He clasped his hands behind his back. Now, madam, I reflect, there is much to consider. This house, so orderly, so noble, it has its secrets, I think. And secrets, madam, are like spilled ink. They always find a way to spread. He turned toward the window once more, peering through the thickening mist. Someone in this house lies, but the lie, it is imperfect, and soon, with just the right pressure, it will break. He turned back to the group. I shall be speaking to each of you again, but for now, remain where you are. Do not leave the grounds, and above all, do not underestimate the little grey cells. Poirot left the drawing-room in silence, his footsteps measured and quiet, his mind already whirring with contradictions, gestures, glances. The Marchmont sapphire had not vanished into thin air. It had simply found its way into the wrong hands, and Hercule Poirot intended to find out precisely whose. Poirot climbed the grand staircase with deliberate slowness, each step accompanied by a faint creak that echoed down the corridor like a clock ticking toward truth. He paused on the first-floor landing, glancing down a long hallway lined with doors. Guest rooms, he presumed, each a possible hiding place for the sapphire, or more crucially, for a guilty conscience. He did not return to his own quarters straight away. Instead, he turned and entered the library, a room he had noted in passing earlier. Its heavy curtains were drawn against the afternoon mist, and the air smelled faintly of leather and tobacco. Poirot moved, past rows of books, with the quiet reverence of a man in a church. He reached a small table near the far window, where two chairs stood opposite each other, and a pack of cards lay neatly stacked, still marked with the memory of the previous night's whist game. He studied the cards, then the ashtray on the side table. A pipe rested there, half-smoked. Poirot lifted it gently and examined the ash, dark, fine and dry. "Reverend Alton," he murmured to himself, "you said you retired early, but this pipe was warm not 2 hours ago. A small discrepancy, yes?" He turned next to a drinks cabinet and opened it with a click. A few glasses sat rinsed and ready, but one had a faint trace of lipstick. Poirot raised it to the light. "Mademoiselle Faraday, perhaps you returned for a nightcap." He set it back gently. "The details? They betray you all in time." Footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Parsons appeared in the doorway, brow furrowed. "Forgive me, sir," he said. "Miss Grey asked if she might speak with you privately. She seemed unsettled." Poirot nodded. "Bring her here, if you please. A change in surroundings may bring a change in candour." Moments later, Penelope Grey entered, pale and visibly nervous. She clutched a handkerchief in both hands, twisting it rhythmically. "I didn't want to say it in front of the others," she said softly, "but I think someone was in my room Thursday night." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "You are certain, mademoiselle?" "I woke up just before midnight. I thought I heard something, a creak, like someone stepped on the landing. Then my door. I'm not sure if it opened, or if I dreamt it. I was half asleep. Did you find anything disturbed?" "Number, that's what's strange. Nothing was taken, nothing moved, but I felt watched." Poirot watched her closely. "Did you lock your door?" She shook her head. "None of the doors have locks. Aunt Eugenia doesn't believe in them." "A curious stance for a woman who owns a priceless sapphire," Poirot muttered. Then louder, "Mademoiselle, tell me, what is your relationship with Lady Marchmont?" Penelope hesitated. "Distant. She is difficult. Since my mother died, she has taken me in out of obligation, not affection. She reminds me of it often." "And you?" Poirot asked gently. "Do you bear resentment?" Penelope's eyes flashed with sudden defiance. "I have dreams, Monsieur Poirot. I want to study music, make something of myself. But she calls it foolishness, waste. I'm to marry well and preserve the Marchmont name. That's what matters." Poirot folded his hands. "And what of the sapphire? Did you covet it?" "No," she said quickly. Then, softer, "But I hated how she used it to make a point, showing it to me as if to say, 'This is what you'll never have unless you do exactly as I say.'" Poirot nodded slowly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most honest. Honesty, it is rare in such matters, and precious." Penelope rose, smoothing her skirt. "Do you think you'll find it?" Poirot stood as well. "I never begin what I do not intend to finish." When she had gone, Poirot stood for a moment in the stillness, considering her words. A girl with ambition, stifled by a cold guardian, offered a glimpse of glittering freedom. Was that not motive enough? And yet something in her fear had felt genuine. He left the library and returned to his room, where he retrieved a small notebook from his valise and began to list what he knew. Motive. Lawrence. Financial frustration. Inheritance disputes. Chloe. Opportunistic. Sharp, yet unconcerned with jewelry, she claims. Colonel Delafield. No clear motive yet, but perhaps protective of Lawrence. Penelope. Resentment and ambition. Reverend Alton. A mystery, discrepancy in his timeline, opportunity. All were in the house. No one could have entered or left. Timing between the exhibition and discovery of the theft left a full night and day. Too much time. The thief had not rushed. Behavior. Chloe, too, amused. Delafield defensive. Penelope frightened, possibly manipulated. Alton jovial, perhaps too much. There was a knock. Poirot answered to find Lawrence Marchmont leaning in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "You're making quite a stir," he said. "Aunt's been pacing since tea. She doesn't like not knowing." "Most people do not," Poirot replied, "especially when their control is threatened." Lawrence smirked. "You think she's afraid you'll uncover some family scandal?" Poirot tilted his head. "Is there one to uncover?" Lawrence entered uninvited and sat across from him. "Let's just say the Marchmonts have a long memory. Aunt Eugenia keeps records of everything. She calls it tradition. I call it paranoia. You don't get on well with her. She doesn't think I'm fit to inherit, thinks I'm reckless. Maybe I am. But I'm also the only Marchmont left who isn't a servant or a skeleton. And frankly, if the family legacy hinges on a blue rock, it's not much of a legacy." Poirot studied him. "You speak lightly of value, and yet you were heard arguing the night before the theft." Lawrence's smile faded. "We argued about my trust fund. She's holding it hostage. Wants me to settle down, find a wife, be respectable. But I won't marry for money." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And if someone else were to take the Sapphire, someone who might then sell it, would you protect them?" Lawrence stood abruptly. "Why? Do you think I know who took it?" "I think," Poirot said calmly, "that you are far more clever than you pretend." Lawrence's mouth twitched. Then he turned for the door. "Let me know when you're ready to accuse someone, Monsieur Poirot. I could use the entertainment." Poirot waited until the door closed behind him. Then he returned to his notebook and underlined a single word: performance. Later that evening, as the household gathered for supper, Poirot took his usual place beside Lady Eugenia. She was tense, her eyes scanning each guest as if she could see guilt behind every smile. The conversations were stilted, cautious. Chloe laughed too brightly. The Colonel buttered his bread with surgical precision. Penelope barely touched her soup. The vicar, cheerful as ever, poured himself a second glass of sherry and praised the roast. Poirot watched it all. Theft, he knew, rarely occurred in a vacuum. It pulled at threads, emotions, fears, ambitions, and unravelled what was already fraying. The Marchmont household was full of such threads. As the plates were cleared and coffee served in the drawing-room, Poirot took his cup with both hands and sipped thoughtfully. "Tomorrow," he said aloud, though to no one in particular, "I shall ask each of you for your full account of Thursday night, not just where you were, but what you saw, what you heard, and what you remember." The guests looked at each other. No one spoke. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "It is not only what you say," he murmured, "but what you forget to say. That tells me everything." He rose and excused himself, leaving behind a room stiff with unease. In the hallway, he paused by the stair. A faint breeze touched his face. The window near the landing was open. Only slightly. Just enough. Poirot approached, noting the frame's damp edge, the small smudge near the latch. No footprints on the floor, no signs of forced entry. Still, it had been opened. But why? He stood motionless, listening. And then, very softly, from somewhere beyond the misted gardens, came the distant hoot of an owl. Poirot's expression did not change, but in his mind a new thread had begun to tug, one that reached beyond locked rooms and family quarrels. The affair of the missing sapphire, he thought, was about to reveal far more than theft. Morning came veiled in mist, soft and heavy, blurring the hedgerows and ghosting the edges of Marchmont Hall. Poirot rose early, his routine as deliberate as ever, coffee precisely measured, cravat tied without a wrinkle, shoes polished to a dull gleam. By the time the rest of the house stirred, he had already walked the perimeter of the property once, taking in the grounds, the weather, the distances between windows, doors, and opportunity. Now he stood in the breakfast room, alone save for Parsons, who moved silently about with the elegance of a man who had long ago mastered invisibility. "Parsons," Poirot said gently, breaking the silence, "you are a man who notices things, yes?" "I try to be observant, sir," Parsons replied, setting down a small silver rack of toast. "Then perhaps you noticed something strange Thursday night, or the morning after?" Parsons hesitated. "The house was unusually tense. Even before the sapphire was discovered missing, there was some kind of quarrel, doors slamming, raised voices. I don't eavesdrop, but it was hard to ignore. Who quarrelled? Parsons cleared his throat. I believe it was Lady Eugenia and Mr. Lawrence, sir. And afterward, Miss Grey came down to the kitchen. Pale, shaken. She asked for warm milk. Said she couldn't sleep. At what time? Close to midnight, sir. Poirot made a note of it. And no one came in or out of the house, you are certain? Yes, sir. I locked the doors myself at 10. I checked the gates before bed. They were chained. Poirot tapped the edge of his cup. And the window on the stair landing, was it closed that night? Parsons frowned. It should have been, but in the morning it was open. Just a crack. I assumed the wind, though I suppose that was foolish. No, Poirot said. It is not foolish. Only the wind rarely smudges window panes. Parsons looked puzzled, but Poirot dismissed him with a nod. Merci, Parsons. You have been most helpful. One by one, Poirot called the guests to the study that morning. No dramatic confrontation, no forceful questions, just a quiet, careful peeling back of Thursday night. Colonel Delafield was first. He answered gruffly, arms crossed over his chest, jaw tight. Yes, I saw the sapphire. Fine thing. Marchmont family's proud of it, and rightly so. Never touched it, though. After dinner, I smoked with the vicar, and then turned in. Poirot nodded. You are protective of the Marchmont name, no? The colonel snorted. Someone ought to be. Lawrence plays the indifferent rake, but he's the last of the bloodline. And Eugenia, she's trying to hold this place together with propriety and tea service. Did you hear the argument that night? I heard raised voices. Didn't want to intrude. You say you retired early, and yet the vicar claims you played cards until 10:30. Closer to 11, Delafield corrected, frowning. Why? No reason, Colonel, Poirot replied mildly. Only I find the difference between 10:30 and 11 fascinating, that is all. Next came Chloe Faraday, all smiles and scented elegance. She reclined, as if this were a social affair, one hand idly twirling a strand of hair. So formal, Monsieur Poirot. I feel like a schoolgirl again. Will there be a test? No test, mademoiselle. Only clarity. Tell me again. Thursday night? I was with Penelope. We played a duet, then chatted. She's sweet, if a little naive. We retired late. I took a book to bed. Didn't sleep much. Why not? Storm, perhaps. And the energy in the house, it felt strange. Too many secrets swirling about. Poirot raised his brows. And were you alone all night? Physically, yes. She smiled slyly. Mentally? Who can say? Poirot's expression did not change. You like attention. But sometimes, mademoiselle, one hides behind charm. Chloe leaned forward. And what do you think I'm hiding? That, Poirot said, standing, is what I intend to find out. Penelope arrived next, still pale, her hands tucked into her sleeves. She answered quietly, her gaze drifting to the windows. I told you what I know. Chloe and I spent the evening in the music room. She asked about my studies. I was happy to talk. It was nice to feel listened to. You admired the sapphire? Yes. You were emotional. Why? Penelope hesitated. Because it reminded me of my mother. She wore it once when she came to visit Aunt Eugenia. I remember watching it shimmer against her dress, like a piece of sky trapped in silver. Poirot watched her with a gentle expression. You miss her still? Penelope nodded. Every day. And what would you do to reclaim even a piece of her? She blinked, startled. Nothing illegal, if that's what you're implying. No, mademoiselle. I only seek the measure of devotion. Finally, Reverend Alton entered, cheerful as always. His steps were light, his manner breezy. I hope I haven't kept you, he said. So many people to speak with. I expect this is exhausting for you. Poirot smiled faintly. It is invigorating, I assure you. Let us revisit Thursday. The card game. Indeed, whist with the Colonel. He beat me thoroughly, retired soon after, read a little, slept fitfully. And the Sapphire? An impressive piece, certainly, but I confess, such extravagance makes me uneasy. One thinks of the poor, the sick, those in need. Poirot studied him. And yet you admire fine things. Your pipe, for instance, hand-carved, rare tobacco blend. The vicar chuckled. Touché, but a pipe is hardly a sapphire. True, but it too can vanish in smoke. The interviews complete, Poirot returned to his room and laid out the facts. Everyone had a motive: resentment, opportunity, memory, vanity. Everyone had an alibi, and each alibi was only as strong as the person who offered it. He considered the window again. Who would open it? To throw something out, to bring something in. Then he remembered the rug beneath the armchair in the drawing-room, slightly skewed, a faint indentation beside it, as if someone had knelt there. Poirot left the room and descended the stairs, heading not for the drawing-room, but for the garden beyond. He walked to the base of the stairwell window, scanning the wet grass, the soft earth beneath it. And there, imperfect, almost vanished, a footprint, small, light, barely visible, but present. He turned slowly and looked up toward the window. Someone had opened it, and someone had stood below, to receive or to pass. He returned to the house, thoughtful. Just as he reached the back corridor, he heard voices, low, urgent. He stepped quietly around the corner and paused. Lawrence and Chloe stood near the servants' door, too engrossed to notice him. "You said it would be safe," Lawrence hissed. Chloe folded her arms. "I said if you were careful. You weren't. You panicked. I didn't think she'd call in a detective. She's Eugenia Marchmont. Of course she would. Then what do we do now?" Poirot stepped into view. But of course, that is the question. Both froze. Chloe's mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. Poirot raised a brow. "Shall we speak now, or later? I find honesty much easier before dinner." Lawrence tried a smirk, but it fell flat. Chloe said nothing at all. Poirot continued past them as if nothing had happened. He had heard enough, but he would not act. Not yet. There were still moves to make, and somewhere, buried in the Marchmont silence, the Sapphire waited to be found. Dinner that evening was subdued, each guest wearing their silence like a carefully chosen garment. Lady Eugenia presided with brittle composure, her spoon tapping against her bowl with mechanical precision. Chloe Faraday, radiant even in unease, picked at her food without appetite. Penelope Grey avoided everyone's gaze. Lawrence drank more wine than necessary, and Colonel Delafield cut his roast as if it were a matter of military discipline. Only Reverend Alton maintained the illusion of ease, offering short anecdotes and cheerful quips that drifted into the silence and died there. Poirot watched it all, every flicker of expression, every pause in conversation, every glance stolen across the table. He said little, content to observe. He noted the way Lawrence's hand twitched when Chloe lifted her wine-glass, the way Penelope glanced up each time the word "jewel" passed anyone's lips, even casually, the way Lady Eugenia stiffened whenever the conversation veered toward timelines or access. By the time the plates were cleared and the guests retired to the drawing-room, Poirot had made a quiet decision. He stood near the hearth while the others settled into their usual places, as if drawn there by habit rather than comfort. He tapped his fingers lightly on the mantel. "I believe," he said, "that it is time for a small game." They looked up, startled. "Not cards," he continued. "A game of memory, a reenactment, if you will. Thursday evening, after dinner, we shall walk through it, each of you. What you did, where you were, whom you saw, as precisely as you can recall. Lady Eugenia raised an eyebrow. Is this entirely necessary? Madam, the truth is a creature that slinks into shadows. To flush it out, we must retrace our steps. Gently. With care, there was a murmur of discomfort, but none of them refused. We begin, Poirot said, gesturing. With you, Colonel Delafield. The colonel nodded, rising stiffly. After dinner, I stepped into the library. Reverend Alton was already there. We played whist, 2 games. Until when? About 10:30, maybe closer to 11. Who else entered the room? No one, not while I was there. Poirot turned. Reverend? The vicar gave a genial nod. That's true. The colonel left around 11. I remained behind for a bit, enjoyed my pipe, then to my room. Did you see anyone in the corridor? Number though, I did hear Miss Grey's violin from the music room. Lovely, melancholic piece. Poirot's gaze shifted. Miss Grey? Penelope stood, looking uneasy but determined. Yes, I was playing. Chloe was with me. She asked me to play something familiar. Brahms, I think. We stayed until nearly midnight. Did you leave the music room at all? She glanced at Chloe, then shook her head. No. Mademoiselle Faraday? Chloe rose slowly, smoothing her skirt. I did leave once, briefly. I needed a handkerchief and remembered leaving one in the drawing room. I went to fetch it. The room was dark. I didn't turn on the light. What time was this? Perhaps 11:45. Did you notice anything unusual? She hesitated, just long enough. No. You are certain? A beat. Yes. Poirot let her return to her seat. And you, Monsieur Marchmont? Lawrence gave a lazy shrug. I went to the billiards room, pounded balls around the table for a while. I was angry after the argument with Aunt Eugenia. I didn't want company. Did anyone see you? Number nor did I see anyone. Poirot folded his hands. And Madame Marchmont? I went to my room shortly after dinner, she said crisply. I had no interest in more conversation. You did not inspect the sapphire, then? Number it remained where I placed it, locked and untouched. Poirot let the silence stretch before he spoke again. You see, mes amis, the stories overlap, almost too neatly. No one saw anyone else, and yet each insists they were not alone, not responsible, not near the room where the jewel was kept. And yet, someone must have been. Lawrence stood suddenly. If you're accusing someone, Poirot, get on with it. Poirot raised a hand. Non, monsieur, I accuse no one. Not yet. But I observe. I reflect. He turned to Lady Eugenia. Madame, may I ask, when you showed the sapphire, did anyone hold it? Number Y held it myself. The others merely observed. And afterward? I returned it to the case immediately, but not to the safe. She stiffened. It was always kept in the locked drawer until the safe could be opened. The key never left my person. Poirot looked thoughtful. Yet the drawer was not forced. No sign of entry. The case was opened with a key. Lady Eugenia flushed. I must have dropped it, misplaced it. Or, Poirot said gently, it was taken from you. Lifted. There was a sharp intake of breath. Lady Eugenia did not respond. Poirot's gaze swept the room. The question becomes not only who wanted the sapphire, but who knew precisely how and when it would be vulnerable. He turned and walked slowly to the armchair by the window, the same place where the empty case had first caught his eye. Someone knelt here, he murmured. Someone who knew how to open the drawer. Someone who acted in silence, in shadow. He looked out through the window once more. The window was opened. Perhaps to pass something down, or to drop something out. The others watched him now in total silence. Poirot turned back. But that is not all. Earlier today I overheard a conversation. Monsieur Lawrence, Mademoiselle Faraday. Chloe stood. You had no right to. Non, Poirot said quietly. I had every right. You spoke of a plan, of panic, of secrecy. Lawrence looked down at his glass. You know something, Poirot continued, but you are not the thief. Number you are protectors, or conspirators after the fact. Neither spoke. And so, Poirot said, I give you both this one chance. Speak now, or I proceed without you. The silence stretched painfully. Then Chloe exhaled and sat down heavily. It wasn't meant to be a theft, she said. At least not like this. Lawrence, he wanted to scare his aunt, force her hand, to make her understand he wasn't a child. So, Poirot said, you plan to remove the sapphire, hide it. Just for a few days, Lawrence muttered. I'd return it. She'd never know it was me. But someone else did, Poirot said softly. Chloe looked up sharply. Yes, he continued. Someone saw, someone who waited, who used your clumsy plan as cover for a real theft. He paced the room slowly. One person did not account for their time. One person stood to benefit in a very quiet, very long-term way. Not money, not revenge, something more personal. A reclaiming of legacy. His eyes moved to the youngest guest in the room. Penelope, he said, would you like to tell them, or shall I? Her breath caught. Her hands were still. I didn't mean to, she whispered. But I saw Chloe take the key. I thought it was part of the plan, a joke. But then I waited, and I knew where she'd put it. And you took the sapphire? Penelope nodded slowly. I wanted to hold it, just once, just to remember. And then, I thought, if they blamed each other, no one would blame me. Lady Eugenia stood slowly. You little fool. She's not a fool, Poirot said. Only a girl who wanted something of her mother back. But I didn't sell it, Penelope said quickly. I hid it. It's still here. Where? Her voice trembled. In the violin case, beneath the velvet lining. Poirot did not move. Lady Eugenia turned toward Parsons. Go! Check! The butler left swiftly. The others sat frozen, breathless. Within minutes he returned, carrying the violin case with white gloves. He opened it, peeled back the lining, and there, nestled beneath, the Marchmont sapphire glowed like a cold, accusing eye. Poirot looked at no one. There it is, the truth, at last. And in the heavy silence that followed, it was Lady Eugenia who spoke first. Lock the case, she said softly. Return it to the safe, and have tea brought in. Poirot did not smile. The performance was nearly complete, but one final act remained. Parsons departed swiftly with the violin case, the gleaming sapphire concealed once again beneath velvet and wood, as though its moment in the light had been no more than a dangerous indulgence. The rest of the drawing-room sat in a tableau of silence. Lady Eugenia, rigid in her chair, Lawrence slouched with an unreadable expression, Chloe watching Poirot with narrowed eyes, Penelope visibly shrinking, and Colonel Delafield clenching his jaw as though biting back judgment. Only Reverend Alton remained curiously impassive, twirling his empty sherry glass in slow, deliberate circles. Poirot stood near the hearth, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze lingering not on the accused, but on the room itself. He let the silence settle, not because he needed it, but because the others did. They were absorbing what had just happened, reconfiguring their opinions of each other, asking silently if what they believed before still held true. At last, Lady Eugenia broke the stillness. You said there was one act left, Monsieur Poirot. I would like it performed. Poirot nodded slowly. You are precise, madame. And yet it is not an act of theatre I offer, but of truth, because something still does not fit. Penelope stiffened. But I admitted everything. You found the sapphire. Yes, Poirot said gently. You hid it. You did not steal it. There is a difference. He turned away from the hearth and began pacing slowly, his steps tracing the perimeter of the rug. You saw Mademoiselle Faraday retrieve the key. You watched. You waited. You acted, emotionally, impulsively. That much is clear. But you did not return to the case to retrieve the jewel. You intercepted it. Penelope blinked. Yes, I waited in the corridor. I saw Chloe leave the drawing room. I went in after. And yet, Poirot continued, when I examined the drawer yesterday, the velvet in the case had been handled, yes, but not disturbed as it would be if the jewel had been removed and replaced. Number It was as if the sapphire had never been there at all, not since Lady Eugenia first placed it back in its case. Lady Eugenia's voice was sharp. What are you saying? I am saying, Poirot replied, that Penelope could not have taken what was no longer there. All heads turned to look at him. She opened the drawer. She believed the sapphire to be inside, but it had already been taken, earlier, perhaps even during the viewing. Chloe's voice, brittle now. You think one of us pocketed it in plain sight? Poirot shook his head. No, that would be clumsy, too visible. But perhaps, when Lady Eugenia held it up, admiring it in the light, speaking of legacy, of value, perhaps, in that moment, someone reached for a decoy. A decoy? Colonel Delafield repeated, incredulous. Poirot turned to him. Yes, a false sapphire, glass perhaps, or blue spinel, hard to distinguish under firelight from a distance. Reverend Alton stirred. That would require remarkable foresight and planning. Indeed, Poirot said, which is why I believe it was not a crime of opportunity. Penelope's act, hers was emotional. This was surgical, practiced. Lady Eugenia stared. Are you suggesting there was more than one plan unfolding that night? Precisely, madame. He paused, then looked toward the vicar. You mentioned earlier that wealth made you uneasy, that jewels such as these felt excessive, that such extravagance sat poorly with your conscience. The Reverend gave a polite smile. A general statement, Monsieur Poirot, not a confession. But your statements have always been general, haven't they? Never specific. You played whist with the Colonel, but he placed your departure at 11. Your pipe ash was fresh the next morning, and more curious, your room was the only one not checked for the missing jewel. Why? I can hardly be expected to search myself, the Reverend said, his tone still mild. Ah, but that is exactly what a thief would expect, that the man of the cloth, the kindly, forgettable vicar, would be above suspicion. There was a faint hiss of breath from Chloe. Lawrence leaned forward slightly. Penelope looked bewildered. Lady Eugenia's voice came thin and sharp. Are you accusing Reverend Alton of theft? I am suggesting, Poirot said calmly, that Reverend Alton is not quite who he claims to be. He stepped closer to the desk near the wall and picked up a slim case that Parsons had left earlier. Inside it were the menus and seating arrangements for Thursday night's dinner. Poirot opened one carefully. You were seated beside Penelope, he said to the vicar, opposite Lady Eugenia. You had a clear view of the sapphire and a natural line of conversation. You admired it. You encouraged others to speak of its beauty. And then, when the opportunity came, you slipped away. Alton folded his hands. And where, pray, is your evidence? Poirot tapped his temple. Here, in the little grey cells. And here? He opened a small pouch from his jacket and produced a folded paper. Lady Eugenia, he said, you keep records of your guests, yes? I asked Parsons to show me your visitor ledger from the past year. He unfolded the sheet. Reverend Alton, real name Harold Alton Birch, was not invited through the parish at all. He came recommended by a letter received via post. A letter that, it turns out, is forged. He does not appear in any church registry in Sussex, nor in the county records of ordained clergymen. The collar, madame, is a costume. Lady Eugenia rose to her feet. Impossible. I've known him. For 3 months, Poirot interrupted gently. And in that time, He has inserted himself into your trust, your household, and your affairs." Alton's expression had not changed, but the hand at his side trembled slightly. Poirot stepped closer. "You are a confidence man, a connoisseur of silence. You befriended Lady Eugenia, played the long game, waited for the moment when your knowledge of the household, its patterns, its vulnerabilities, would allow you to strike." Alton sighed softly. "And if you're wrong?" "I am not," Poirot said, "because you made one mistake. You opened the window on the stair. You dropped something small, a wrapped bundle, into the garden, where no one would think to look, and I found the crushed earth beneath it. You retrieved it the next morning, during your walk to clear your thoughts. You even smoked your pipe near the library window, pretending to have been there all along." Silence gripped the room. Poirot turned to Parsons, who had re-entered quietly. "Fetch the inspector. Mr. Birch is to be detained. Quietly, if you please." The false vicar remained seated, then gave a short nod. "Well played, Monsieur Poirot." "You made it too easy," Poirot replied. "You underestimated the girl who grieved her mother. You overestimated the silence of shadows." As Parsons left, Lady Eugenia sat slowly, her face pale but composed. Penelope stared at Poirot. "But I thought I caused all of it." "You caused only the reveal, mademoiselle," Poirot said kindly. "Not the crime." She blinked. "Then what would have happened if I hadn't taken the jewel?" "Mr. Birch would have vanished the next morning, citing some emergency. You would have discovered the sapphire missing later, and blamed each other." Penelope looked down. Chloe reached for her hand and gave it a quiet squeeze. Poirot exhaled and looked at the guests once more. A crime of planning and patience. A theft nested within another. And only because of a reckless act, of grief, not greed, was the true plot uncovered. Lawrence stood, walked slowly to the window, and stared out into the fog. "I never even liked that damned stone," he muttered. Poirot straightened his cuffs. "Then perhaps, monsieur, you are wiser than you appear." And with that, he walked slowly to the fire and warmed his hands. The last thread had tugged free. The web had collapsed. Now, at last, came justice. Inspector Grange arrived just before dusk, his boots trailing wet prints across the marble as the heavy door closed behind him. The sea fog had thickened into a damp curtain, clinging to the grounds, and for a brief moment Poirot imagined the Marchmont estate suspended in time, isolated like a grand stage awaiting its final bow. Grange, practical and weathered, was a contrast to Poirot's quiet elegance. Tweed coat, notebook already in hand, eyes scanning as if expecting the criminal to leap forth at any moment. Poirot greeted him with his usual nod of cordial restraint. "Inspector, thank you for coming promptly." Grange gave a grunt that might have passed for civility. "You were quite specific in your message. A jewel theft, and a man posing as a vicar." "Indeed," Poirot said, gesturing toward the drawing room. "The guests are waiting. The atmosphere is subdued." Grange entered to find the household gathered in strained silence. Reverend Alton, now simply Harold Birch, sat slightly apart, watched closely by Parsons and a discreet footman. The others stood or sat stiffly, as though unsure whether the curtain had fallen on the drama or merely paused. Grange turned to Birch. "Your name?" Birch sighed, rising slowly. "Harold Birch, if we're skipping the pretense." "Seems we are," Grange said. "And the accusation?" Poirot spoke quietly. "The Marchmont sapphire was stolen, replaced, in fact, by this man during an orchestrated distraction. He gained the household's trust over months, then took his opportunity Thursday evening." Birch didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at Poirot and said, not without admiration, "I thought I'd accounted for every angle." "You accounted for logic," Poirot replied, "but not emotion. The girl disrupted your timing. You did not expect a second thief. Birch gave a small smile. A pity. She would have made a fine accomplice in a different life. Grange stepped forward. You're under arrest for fraud, impersonation and theft, and I dare say Lady Marchmont might have a few civil charges to add. Birch nodded and offered his wrists without protest. You've got the jewel? Yes, Grange confirmed. Then I've done my part, Birch said. Tidy endings all around. As the footman and Parsons escorted him out, Poirot watched him go with a quiet melancholy. Such men, he thought, were like actors, clever, adaptable, rehearsed. But even the best performers forgot that in life the audience had a habit of looking twice. With Birch gone, the room breathed differently, less tension, but no true relief. Grange asked a few final questions of Lady Eugenia, examined the violin case for completeness, then made notes in a small ledger. Before departing, he turned to Poirot. You saved us weeks of slogging, he said. I owe you a pint. Poirot bowed slightly. Merci, but I prefer order to ale. Grange chuckled and departed, leaving the Marchmonts, such as they were, behind. Lady Eugenia remained standing, though her posture seemed less iron than usual. She faced the hearth, her hands lightly clasped, not in composure but in restraint. Poirot stepped beside her, neither speaking for a moment. At last she said, You exposed a fraud and recovered the jewel, yet somehow it doesn't feel like a victory. Poirot responded softly, Because it is not, madame, not entirely. She turned to him. You mean Penelope? He nodded. She acted from pain, not profit, but it revealed something deeper, that this house, for all its grandeur, is wounded. I gave her everything, Lady Eugenia said, a roof, education, connections. You gave her structure, madame, Poirot replied, but not warmth. There was a long silence. She will leave, Lady Eugenia said, more to herself than to him. Yes, Poirot said, but it need not be exile. A scholarship, perhaps, to the Conservatoire in Paris. Let her carry the Marchmont name in music, not shame. Her brows lifted faintly. You presume I am still in a position to grant that? You are, he said, because reputation, madame, is not maintained by silence. It is repaired through action. She looked at him a long moment, then gave a single nod. I will consider it. Poirot turned from her then, and walked to where Penelope stood by the piano. She hadn't touched it all evening, though her fingers hovered near the keys. I once knew a girl, Poirot said, who played the violin to drown out the war. The sound of bombs, you see, it leaves echoes, but music leaves something softer. She looked at him, uncertain. I'm sorry, she whispered. You are young, but even youth carries weight, he said gently. You must now decide what you will do with it. Penelope glanced toward Lady Eugenia, who remained silent. Then she returned her gaze to Poirot. Do you think I deserve forgiveness? Poirot smiled faintly. Forgiveness, mademoiselle, is not earned. It is given, sometimes by others, sometimes by ourselves. Chloe approached them, her eyes now tired but warm. She placed a hand on Penelope's shoulder. You won't face this alone. Penelope blinked, surprised. Chloe added, You're not the only one who wanted to escape this place. Behind them, Lawrence lit a cigarette he didn't need and leaned against the window frame, watching the sea disappear into darkness. He hadn't spoken since Birch's arrest. Now he said, So the great Poirot untangles the knot. And what's left? A bitter woman, a damaged girl, and a house full of ghosts. Poirot looked at him calmly. Non, monsieur. What is left is a chance, for each of you. Lawrence exhaled smoke. You think that's enough? It is never enough, Poirot said. But it is more than you had yesterday. Lawrence said nothing more. Poirot gathered his hat and gloves from the table near the door. Parsons appeared silently with his coat, offering it without a word. Poirot accepted it with a nod. As he stepped into the hallway, Lady Eugenia followed him to the threshold. "I find," she said, "that I do not much care for mysteries." Poirot smiled. "Few people do, once they are solved." She extended her hand. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." He took it briefly. "A pleasure, madame." Outside, the fog had begun to lift. The gravel crunched softly beneath his shoes as he made his way to the waiting car. Behind him, the lights of Marchmont Hall flickered in the high windows, yellow and soft, like memories trying to remain present. Inside, Lady Eugenia returned to the drawing-room, where the others waited. Slowly, without prompting, she crossed the floor to Penelope. "I will write to the conservatoire," she said. "You may study, you may leave, but return when you wish." Penelope's eyes welled. She didn't speak, only nodded. Chloe poured tea, now lukewarm. Lawrence took the glass of sherry left untouched by the vicar. The storm had passed, but the house, the people, it would take time for them to quiet. And on the road winding down from Marchmont Hill, Hercule Poirot sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, watching the fog recede, thinking, as always, not of the crime, but of the people behind it. It was never the jewel, after all. It was always the cracks it revealed. The ride away from Marchmont Hall was a quiet one. Poirot sat in the rear seat of the motor car with his hands folded neatly, the windows slightly cracked to allow the chill sea air to whisper through. The fog had thinned but not vanished. It clung stubbornly to the hills, a reluctant parting guest. The gravel drive wound down from the estate like a ribbon trailing from a loosened knot, and Poirot, as he often did after a case, allowed his mind to revisit the sequence of events, not to doubt them, but to ensure they were complete. He had come to investigate a theft, and in doing so had uncovered two crimes, each born of vastly different human impulses, one calculated, rehearsed, clinical, the other spontaneous, emotional, deeply human. It was not often, Poirot reflected, that the second outwitted the first. That thought, oddly, pleased him. He reached inside his coat for his watch, checked the time, and then looked once more out the window as the final glimpse of Marchmont's stone gables disappeared behind a stand of winter-stripped trees. Back in London that evening, the world felt brisk, modern, and loud after the ghostly quiet of Sussex. Poirot returned to his flat in Whitehaven Mansions, where the warmth of his modest fireplace and the faint scent of lavender oil welcomed him home. He sat at his desk, opened a new page in his private casebook, and began to write. The affair at the missing Sapphire. Resolute. He paused before adding the final sentence. Not all endings were tidy. This one, despite its resolution, had left a faint bruise beneath its neatness. Penelope Grey, the would-be thief turned accidental revealer, was no criminal, and Poirot suspected the courts would see it the same. Lady Eugenia would protect her legacy from scandal, and Birch, clever, disarming Birch, would vanish into the prison system, but not before cataloguing the people he had almost bested. Poirot closed the book gently and stood to pour himself a tisane. As the water boiled, he caught himself humming a slow Brahms melody, the same Penelope had played in the Marchmont music room. Her playing had been uncertain in places, raw, but emotive. There had been more truth in her performance than in half the statements he'd heard during his investigation. As he stirred a spoonful of honey into his cup, he turned his thoughts to the aftermath. He had not yet received word from the conservatoire, but he had taken the liberty of writing a private letter on Penelope's behalf, unsigned, save for his initials. It would be better if they thought the recommendation came from her guardian. It would give her ownership of her path. He returned to his chair by the fire, allowing the soft crackle of the flames to fill the room. Then, with no fanfare, he allowed the details to drift into the past. He would not dwell. There would be another case soon. There always was. But Poirot was not the only one left turning over what had happened. At Marchmont Hall, the days that followed unfolded with an unfamiliar quiet. The air was lighter without Birch's constant presence, though no one spoke of him by name. His room was emptied discreetly. A local constable had come to collect a small trunk containing forged documents and a typewriter with letters worn in precise, unnatural ways. Chloe remained at the estate a few days longer than planned. Whether it was duty or affection that kept her, no one knew for sure. She spent her mornings walking with Penelope along the cliff paths, heads bowed together in private conversation. They said little at meals, but the silence between them had changed. It no longer crackled with suspicion. One morning, Chloe approached Lady Eugenia in the conservatory, where the older woman was pruning her orchids. "I'm leaving today," Chloe said simply. Lady Eugenia clipped a browned petal, her eyes still on the stem. "You'll be missed." Chloe gave a faint smile. "Even by you?" Eugenia glanced at her. "Especially by me. You're insufferable at times, but you listen and you do not flatter. Then I have failed utterly as a companion." "Not failed," Eugenia murmured. "Transformed." Chloe hesitated. "I'll write to Penelope. I think she's afraid you'll change your mind." "I won't," the older woman said. "She is her mother's daughter after all. That was the part I ignored for too long." Chloe nodded. Then, with her usual poise, she turned and left without ceremony. Lawrence, for his part, grew quieter in the days that followed. He stopped throwing open the billiard-room doors, stopped pretending to be amused by everything. One afternoon, Penelope found him seated beneath the portrait of their grandfather in the long gallery, staring not at the canvas, but at his hands. She sat beside him without a word. "You think I'm a joke," he said finally. Penelope didn't answer. "You're not wrong," he continued. "I thought I could trick her, teach her a lesson, but all I did was open the door for someone far worse." Penelope looked at him. "You didn't hurt anyone." "No," he said, "but I didn't help anyone either." She tilted her head. "Then maybe now you can." Lawrence gave a short, rueful laugh. "Maybe." She stood to leave. As she turned, he called after her. "I'll help with the tuition, whatever the conservatoire doesn't cover." Penelope froze. Then she nodded once. "Thank you." That night, a letter arrived from London. It was addressed in precise script to Miss Penelope Grey. Inside, an official offer of admission, accompanied by a scholarship, and, tucked within the folds of the page, a note with no signature. "Make your music louder than your regrets. H.P." She read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside her music journal, beneath the page of Brahms she had played the night of the theft. Upstairs, Lady Eugenia lit a candle before bed, her eyes lingering on the photograph of her sister. She did not weep. She did not speak. But she placed a hand lightly against the frame, as if to acknowledge a silent agreement now honored. Miles away, in his quiet flat, Poirot added the final touch to his casebook. Resolution satisfactory. Motivation human. Justice served, quietly, but completely. He set down the pen, folded his hands, and allowed himself a single word aloud. Enfin. And with that, he closed the book. 1 week later, a letter arrived at Whitehaven Mansions, bearing a familiar wax seal and the unmistakable penmanship of Lady Eugenia Marchmont. Poirot, in the middle of reorganizing his cravat drawer, paused and opened the envelope with care. Inside was a brief note, formally worded, of course, but with a touch less stiffness than before. "Monsieur Poirot, I write not only to confirm that Miss Grey has departed safely for Paris, with all necessary documents in hand and my full blessing, but also to inform you that Marchmont Hall has begun preparations for a formal restoration, both of its public rooms and, dare I say, of its relationships. I have had much to reflect upon. Your intervention, though disruptive, was precise. You saw clearly through what we, in our comfort, had taught ourselves not to see. You have my thanks, and, unexpectedly, my admiration. Yours, Eugenia Marchmont Poirot, read it twice, then folded it and placed it into his casebook beside the final page of the Sapphire affair. It pleased him not for its praise, though he never objected to admiration, but because it confirmed something rarer: change. The Marchmonts, though rattled, were beginning to tilt back toward equilibrium, and Penelope, he hoped, had already touched her bow to string beneath the tall arched windows of the conservatoire. It might have ended there, but it did not. Because that evening, just as Poirot sat down with his usual chamomile tisane, the telephone rang. He answered with a calm, "Allô?" The voice on the other end belonged to Inspector Grange. "Poirot, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening. I've something peculiar I think you ought to hear." "Ah," Poirot replied, smiling faintly. "And you hope that my little grey cells are still awake, eh?" "Something like that," Grange said. "Do you recall the Birch fellow? The one who posed as Reverend Alton?" "Mais oui," Poirot said, sitting straighter. "A man with patience, charm, and unfortunate ambition. I recall him very well." "Well," Grange said, "it seems he's vanished." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Vanished?" "Escaped during transfer. Slipped out just past Crawley. It was raining, visibility low. 2 constables in the van. One moment he was there, the next, nothing. Left his cuffs, mind you. Picked with a hairpin, we think." "And no sightings since?" "None. Not yet." Poirot rose and walked slowly to the window. London glittered beyond the glass, vast and indifferent. "This is not a man who runs without a reason," he said. "Birch is clever, calculated. If he has escaped, he has a plan. Tell me, did he take anything with him?" "Just his satchel. Clothes, a few books, nothing unusual. Except one item. We almost missed it. He'd folded it into the lining. A photograph. A photograph of what?" "Marchmont Hall," Grange said grimly. "Taken from the sea path below the cliffs. We had it dated. Printed only a week before he showed up on the estate. Your hunch was right. He'd been planning this for months." Poirot said nothing at first. His mind had already moved past the facts and into their implications. "He had no further use for the sapphire," Poirot murmured, "and yet he kept that image." Grange's voice sharpened. "You think he might go back?" Poirot pressed his fingers together. "Non, not to steal. Not again. He will not risk returning to the same stage where the curtain fell on him. But perhaps to correct something, or someone. You think he's after revenge?" "I think he is a man embarrassed," Poirot said quietly. "An embarrassment is a dangerous motivator, more than greed, more even than pride." Grange exhaled heavily. "Should we warn the Marchmonts?" "Discreetly," Poirot said. "Do not alarm them without cause. But yes, post a man, and speak to the local patrol. Birch will not go in the front door if he comes at all." "I'll arrange it," Grange said. "And Poirot, thank you. Again." When the line went dead, Poirot stood for several moments in stillness. Something in him refused to settle. He did not believe Birch would return to Marchmont Hall. No, not directly. But a man like Birch did not vanish into thin air. He re-emerged elsewhere, in new clothes, with a new name. Yet there had been something deliberate about the photograph, something intimate. It was not merely the house that Birch had studied. It was the angle, the view from below, the way a servant might approach, or an exile. Poirot made tea again, this time stirring without looking. His thoughts turned not to the estate itself, but to the people within it. "Chloe, had returned to London. Lawrence, as far as Poirot knew, had gone to visit an old university friend in Edinburgh. Penelope was in Paris. Only Lady Eugenia remained at the Hall, and she, perhaps more than any, had wounded Birch's pride. She had been the one to name him a fraud, the one who had insisted he be taken away in silence, like a servant dismissed. Poirot moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a narrow envelope. Inside was a note he had not yet posted, a quiet letter to Penelope, wishing her well. He sat down, added a single line, and sealed it. Then he composed another. To Lady Eugenia. Madam, please do not walk alone in the lower gardens, and do not open the door at night unless you know the name of the one who knocks. Humbly, Hercule Poirot. He would not sign it with alarm. He would not overstep, but he would not let the affair fade into complacency. The Marchmonts had survived a theft, a deception, a shame made public. But Birch had not been caught, only outwitted, and a man outwitted was a man unfinished. Poirot turned out the light, but sleep came late, and beyond the city, the fog that had once clung to the Marchmont estate thickened once more along the cliff paths. It gathered silently around the iron gates, curled into the hedgerows, and lingered near the garden wall, waiting. It was the 5th night after Birch's escape when the quiet broke. Lady Eugenia Marchmont, never one to surrender to dread, had followed Poirot's letter with more curiosity than fear. She had, of course, instructed Parsons to ensure the locks were inspected, the grounds checked nightly, and the staff informed. She carried the letter folded neatly in the top drawer of her writing desk, not hidden, but not displayed either. She read it once each morning and once each evening, and said nothing to anyone about it. She had never been the sort to admit concern, but concern had nonetheless settled like a veil over the estate. That evening the wind had dropped entirely, and the mist that usually rolled from the sea hung motionless against the hedgerows. The air was too still for comfort. Eugenia noticed it as she finished her nightly walk through the conservatory, a path she often used to clear her mind. She paused by the last of the orchids, pressed a fingertip gently to a yellowed leaf, then turned out the light and walked toward the side corridor. A sound halted her, not loud, just the smallest clink, like metal brushing stone. She stopped. The noise did not come again. She resumed walking, though her hand now hovered instinctively near the bell pull that ran through the hallway's wooden trim, but she did not touch it. Not yet. At the stair landing, she paused again and turned toward the gallery where the portraits of the Marchmont lineage loomed in shadow. Something caught her eye, not a movement, but the absence of one. The curtains at the far end were parted. She was almost certain she had closed them earlier herself. A detail. Small. Yet it snagged. She continued upstairs, her pace unchanged, but she no longer moved as a woman in her own house. She moved like someone being watched. In her room, she locked the door. Parsons found the opened window in the back corridor an hour later. He said nothing to the other staff, but he did leave the latch bolted after he secured it, and when he brought Lady Eugenia her morning tray, he hesitated just a second longer at the threshold. Meanwhile, in London, Poirot read Granger's latest telegram over a slice of toast. The report was brief, still no trace of Birch, though a traveller at a railway inn in Brighton had seen a man matching his description. Alone, with a limp, possibly staged, left before dawn, paid in cash. Poirot tapped the edge of the telegram with a single rhythmic finger. A limp, always a detail to inspire sympathy, and an easy one to discard when it had served its purpose. The clock on the mantel ticked quietly. Poirot glanced up at it. There was something else. Not just the return to Marchmont, not just revenge. Birch's ego had been bruised, yes, but it had also been observed. Poirot had pierced through his act so precisely, Birch would not allow it to be left unfinished, which meant something bolder, something theatrical. Poirot considered this for a long time before rising, retrieving his coat, and heading for the door. The morning was cold and grey as he stepped outside, but in his mind the pieces were beginning to form a new pattern. At Marchmont Hall, the next letter arrived in the Morning Post. It bore no return address. Lady Eugenia read it over a cup of bitter tea, her hands steady, though the fine porcelain rattled once against its saucer. The letter was brief, typewritten, no salutation, only lines centered on the page. You stripped me of my role, but I have written a new one. When the curtain falls, all debts will be settled. H.B. She did not call the police. Instead, she folded the letter slowly, stood, and walked it to the fire. She dropped it into the flames, and did not watch it burn. Then she rang for Parsons. "Send for Monsieur Poirot," she said, "immediately, and do not speak of this to anyone." The house obeyed her command, but the air within its walls seemed to pulse with something unspoken. That night the wind returned, not loud but persistent, hissing faintly through the gaps around the tall windows, like breath held too long. Poirot arrived by late afternoon the next day. Parsons met him at the door, coat dusted with sleet, eyes weary. "She's in the morning room, sir." Poirot removed his gloves one finger at a time. "You've kept the house quiet?" "As ordered, though some of the staff are uneasy. There's been movement." "Movement?" "Footsteps. Twice now in the service corridor. Nothing seen, but felt." Poirot gave a quiet nod. "Have the patrols noticed anything?" "No breaches, no disturbances. Just that stillness again." Poirot stepped into the morning room. Lady Eugenia rose, still composed, though her eyes revealed a strain only he would notice. "I burned the letter," she said. "I know," Poirot replied, "but it does not matter. Birch did not write to inform. He wrote to announce." Eugenia poured him a cup of tea and set it before him. "Then let him come." Poirot's eyes lifted. "That is not courage speaking, madame. That is weariness. I've lived through worse." "But this is different," he said. "This is not about survival. This is about correction. For him it is theatre, a finale. That makes it dangerous." She looked down at the table, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then she said, "He means to shame me, not harm me." Poirot shook his head. "Non, shame is only one blade in his hand. The other is spectacle." He sipped the tea. Then he leaned forward. "Madame, I must ask, what have you done with the sapphire?" Her face changed only slightly, but it was enough. "I've hidden it." "Where?" She hesitated. "Not in the house. I sent it to the bank, after your warning." Poirot exhaled. "Bon, then the bait is gone, but the stage remains. That is what concerns me." She stared into her cup. "What would you have me do?" He smiled faintly. "We prepare the curtain call." Over the next hour, Poirot walked the estate with Parsons. He noted every angle of approach from the grounds, every window that faced the east garden, every passage not regularly used by staff. At the end, they stood at the base of the back stair, where the corridor narrowed near the gallery. "It is here," Poirot said softly. "This is where he will try. He will come not for the stone, but for the staging." Parsons swallowed. "Should we alert the others?" "Non. We let the play begin." That evening, just before the house retired, Poirot requested only one candle be left burning, in the portrait gallery, beneath the painting of Lady Eugenia's great-grandfather, who wore the sapphire pinned to his chest. The light flickered faintly beneath his painted eyes. Poirot waited behind the velvet curtain at the far end, his shoes silent, his breath measured. Outside, the wind returned once more, and from somewhere near the garden wall, a faint scrape of metal sounded. soft and slow. The first footstep landed on the wood with perfect silence, and Poirot, at last, did not move. He simply waited, eyes narrowed, waiting for Birch to make his entrance. The final act had begun. The silence in the portrait gallery was absolute, so complete that even the flicker of the lone candle seemed to pulse too loudly. Hercule Poirot stood motionless behind the velvet curtain, concealed in shadow, every sense sharpened. He had not moved for nearly 20 minutes. The candle had begun to burn low, its wax a slowly melting hourglass. And still, he waited. Then it came. A shape, no more than a whisper of movement, slid in from the servants' stairway. A dark figure, cloaked against the chill, glided across the far end of the gallery and paused just beneath the great painting of the Marchmont patriarch. For a long moment, the figure stood perfectly still, as if looking into the eyes of the painted man. Then, very slowly, he reached up and placed something on the small antique table beneath the portrait. The object caught the candlelight. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The Marchmont sapphire. And yet it could not be. The true sapphire had been secured at the bank for days. The man stepped back, and Poirot stepped forward. "Bravo," he said calmly, his voice carrying just enough to catch the figure off guard. "The staging is exquisite, Monsieur Birch, but alas, the illusion is spoiled by the choice of prop." Birch froze, hand halfway to his pocket, and turned. He was dressed in a long coat, a false collar again at his neck. His hair had been cropped short, his face clean-shaven, but it was him. The same precise stillness, the same eyes like twin needles. "I expected you," he said quietly. "You desired me," Poirot corrected. "This was not an escape. It was a summons." Birch smiled. "You should be flattered." "Oh, I am," Poirot said, stepping closer. "For you are a man who values performance, and tonight you wish to offer your final act." Birch's gaze flicked to the fake sapphire. "I could have vanished, but that would have left the story unfinished." "You could not abide that." Birch said nothing. Poirot reached the table and examined the imitation jewel. "Paste. Very well cut. You had it made before the first theft, n'est-ce pas? You meant to replace the sapphire that very night. If Penelope had not interfered, you might have succeeded without trace." Birch nodded once. "Timing matters." She broke the rhythm. "And your ego would not allow that," Poirot said gently. "You had to return, to reclaim the final word, not the stone, but the legacy of the theft." Birch's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "What is a crime, Monsieur Poirot, if not a question posed to the world?" Poirot tilted his head. "And what is a solution, if not the answer the world never expected?" Behind them, soft footsteps echoed. Parsons emerged from the far side of the gallery with Inspector Grange behind him, revolver drawn, face set in grim determination. Birch did not move. Poirot lifted a hand. "He is unarmed and finished." Grange approached cautiously, cuffing Birch with quiet efficiency. The man did not resist. "You're under arrest, again," Grange muttered. "Let's see how long it lasts this time." As he was led away, Birch turned once more to Poirot. "Was I right, at least? Did you understand it all?" Poirot looked at him with that rare expression of restrained compassion. "Oui, I understood. But you, mon ami, you misunderstood what truly matters." Birch said no more. The candle finally guttered and went out. Later that evening, back in the drawing-room, Poirot sat beside the fire with Lady Eugenia. The house had resumed its silence, but now it was a calmer silence, one with edges dulled by resolution. "He came not to steal," Poirot said, "but to rewrite the ending." She nodded, "and failed." "In a way," Poirot said, "but he did leave something behind." She glanced at him. "He reminded you," Poirot said, "that control is not safety. that silence does not erase cracks. You must tend to the foundation. Eugenia did not argue. Instead, she poured him a final cup of tea and said, "Will you write to Penelope? Tell her it's over?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No need. She will feel it through the music." He stood, took his hat, and paused once at the door. "One day," he said, "this house will tell a different story, one of healing, not hiding." And then, without flourish or ceremony, he left. Outside, the night had cleared. The stars above Marchmont Hall blinked silently, watching a story close and another begin, as the greatest performances often do, not with thunder, but with a quiet bow and the slow fading of light.